we live in a world where we almost have too much information, too much data at our fingertips. So it's really important to review what you already have before you start adding data to that existing pile.
Welcome to the Curiosity Current, the podcast where we dive deep into what's shaping today's trends and tomorrow's consumers. I'm your host, Stephanie, and I'm so glad you're joining me. Each episode, we tap into the minds of researchers, innovators, and insights professionals to explore how curiosity drives discovery and how discovery drives better decisions in an ever-changing market landscape. Whether you're a data enthusiast, a strategy pro, or like me, just endlessly fascinated by human behavior, this is the place for you. So get ready to challenge your assumptions, spark some fresh thinking, and have some fun along the way. Let's see where curiosity takes us next with this brand new episode. Welcome back to the Curiosity Current. Today I'm joined on the hosting side by Brianna Boyer, Senior Director of Solution Strategy at AYTM, and a longtime friend and colleague of mine. We've been working together for 12 years. Brianna, thank you so much for joining today. And even more exciting, on the guest side, Brianna and I are joined by Leena Doshi, Senior Manager of Research at Electronic Arts, where she leads the charge in market research strategy to inform business decisions and elevate customer experiences. Leena brings a wealth of experience from her time at EA and uShip, where she has been instrumental in building market research functions, leading global research projects, and leveraging data to drive innovation and growth. In our conversation today, we'll explore the evolving role of market research in a fast-paced industry like gaming. We'll talk about the differences in solving data mysteries versus data puzzles, and balancing insights that honor complexity and individuality in gaming audiences with universal truths that can drive action. We cannot wait to dive in. Leena, welcome to the Curiosity Current. We're excited to have you with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, to kick us off, there is a question that we often start with. In this case, you've had such an interesting career so far, spanning, several different industries, from gaming at EA to logistics at uShip. What initially drew you to market research? How'd you get into the field, and how has your journey evolved over the years?
So it's kind of a funny story, because I literally just stumbled across marketing research as a function. I was out looking actually for MBA programs. I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at the time, and I was just wandering around looking for MBA programs, and I stumbled across the Master of Science in Marketing Research at the University of Texas at Arlington. And I met with the advisor, and he told me all about the program, and I was in. I was hooked. I loved the idea of being able to combine data and kind of the human story. And it's been amazing ever since. And kind of over the span of my career, the passion hasn't changed. But I think my role in the process definitely has changed a little bit, going from more of the doer, like in the weeds, getting into the research, where now it's more the strategic thought leadership role.
I love how we all just stumble into this industry.
It's such a common theme. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, we've all got our own journeys of stumbling, so it's always cool to hear. So with your extensive experience in shaping research strategies and driving customer-centric decisions, how do you define consumer insights in today's rapidly changing market landscape, especially in industries as dynamic as gaming and shipping?
So I really thought long and hard about this question and how I wanted to answer it. And I think that what is consumer insights, I don't think that part changes. Humans are complicated and can be hard to predict, which is kind of why we study them and why we have jobs. So I think as researchers, in a nutshell, we study human needs and wants and perceptions and behavior to better understand them. And we also kind of sit in a unique analytics position, because we are able to create data to solve problems. So for example, at EA, we have large analytics teams, but their jobs are all about analyzing data that already exists. So they are looking at telemetry data, marketing funnel data, metrics, stuff like that, and analyzing it. Whereas researchers or insights professionals, we have the power and ability to go out and create new data sets to help solve these human problems and challenges. So I think the core of what we do doesn't change, even with the rapidly changing technology and industry environments. What does change, though, is how we are going to meet these challenges, these human challenges. So the tools in our toolkit are rapidly changing as technology continues to evolve, and we're going to have to evolve our methodologies with it.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into that a little later in the discussion. So I'm looking forward to unpacking that a little bit more. Before we do that, there's kind of a topic that I wanted to chat with you about. And so to start, I think anytime you move from, to a new org or a new industry, there's change, right? You're learning and adjusting to new things. But there's something about your journey that I have to imagine, there are some pretty big differences in consumer behavior and even research needs between an industry like logistics versus one like gaming. And this is where I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole last night, thinking about games like college football versus Apex versus The Sims, and how complex and different your audiences can really be in gaming. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you've adapted your approach to insights for the gaming industry, and how do you navigate this is kind of a two-parter. How do you navigate the complexity of audiences in gaming to find that balance between honoring the diversity, but still pulling insights that are generalizable enough to make an impact?
It is not easy. That's the answer. It is hard because you're absolutely right. We've got such, our games are our products, and we've got such drastically different, products. You can go from Apex Legends to The Sims or to any of our sports games. And like you said, the audiences are completely different. But a lot of it is really just recognizing that they are different and not going in with the assumption that, oh, well, I can just make, I'm sure the Madden player is close enough to the Sims player. And so it's really just acknowledging that there are differences. And as you do the research, making sure that you're accounting for those differences and not making assumptions about what is or isn't true, because that happens a lot. Folks get into the habit of just making assumptions about who the player is or what they do. And so as the insights professional, it's really important that we're able to take a step back and help the business have that awareness about the distinctions and the differences in the player bases. So I think, so you were asking about how, we customize it. And I think it's more about working with the business and making sure that they are not lumping people together that they shouldn't be. It's more about the differences are how we interact and how we help the businesses, because each of the products kind of work a little bit differently. We have to customize that to each of the teams, essentially.
It makes sense. Are there ever times where you think about or do research where you are thinking about gamers a little bit more monolithically? Or do you find that you pretty much always need to be thinking at the product level and the audience for that particular game?
It kind of depends on what you're talking about, because obviously our products and our different games are their own brands, and it's important to keep the players, kind of in their own buckets for each of the products. But we're EA as a brand as well. And so it's, which is hard because EA as a brand is like almost the entire population.
Right. Yeah.
It's just complicated, and you have to keep all of these things in mind when you're talking about it. So it really just depends on the objectives and what you're after, and where you're talking about the EA as a brand, and you're talking about one of the products, and you just have to kind of customize your approach depending on what it is you're after. Like anything else we do, the answer is it depends.
It depends. Yeah. No, very reliable answer.
Yeah, a classic one for sure. So, in your recent YouTube miniseries on solving data, mystery versus puzzles, which was fantastic, I really enjoyed watching that and recommend everyone go check it out. You discussed how data can be approached differently depending on whether it's a mystery or a puzzle. Could you elaborate on how understanding this distinction changes the way market researchers should approach problem solving?
Yeah. So I loved doing this, that little YouTube series. It was super interesting. Had great conversations about it. And in a nutshell, a puzzle is relatively easy to solve. You just find all of the puzzle pieces and you put them together, and then you have your answer. A puzzle typically has a single solution, or in research terms, you have a problem, you conduct a study, and then you have your answer. So that's typically a puzzle. On the other hand, you have a mystery, and a mystery is complicated, ambiguous, and doesn't necessarily have a solution or have a single solution or even a solution at all. because of the ambiguity and complexity, it's best to approach a mystery by gathering and reviewing all of the existing data that you have on the problem. So we live in a world where we almost have too much information, too much data at our fingertips. So it's really important to review what you already have before you start adding data to that existing pile. And this is especially true, I think, when you're leveraging any kind of technology, like all of our other tools. Technology is a tool, and like any other tool, it's only as good as its operator. So you want to make sure you gather. If you think you have a mystery on your hand, the way to approach it is gather everything you have and analyze that before you do anything else. Versus a puzzle, which is you have a problem, create a study, put all the pieces together, and then you have your answer.
How did you develop that framework? I'm so curious because it's super intuitive. Like as you talk about it, I'm like, of course, that is, and I can map a lot of experiences to it and I've never heard it articulated in that way.
The idea came from a book that I read called Intelligence for an Age of Terror by Gregory F. Treverton. And that book is all about data and security at the national level. So he was the chairman of now I've forgotten exactly the name of what he was the chairman for, but he wrote this book that it was all about like data and technology. So for example, he talked about why did 9/11 happen in terms of data? Like who had what data and how it, crossed or didn't cross, left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing kind of thing. And so I read that book and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And so I took a lot of the lessons he learned from data at the national security level and then said, all right, how does this apply to research? How does this apply to the data and the analytics that we do every day? And so that's one of the ideas that I came up with from reading this book is that, and he's the one that coined like the puzzle and the mystery. So I cannot take credit for that. But I took all of the learnings that he shared in that book and then applied it to insights professionals in research. And one of that was say, okay, if you define something as a puzzle, then just go out and execute the research project, and then you have your answer versus the mystery, which is you likely have way too much data already, and make sure you're analyzing and collecting everything you have before you go and add more data by doing another research study. So that's kind of how that came about.
It's so interesting. It's fascinating. Also, that you were able to take this government level perspective on data and translate it to consumer insights.
For anybody who's interested, I highly recommend the book, but it is not an easy read. Like it's a tough, like it's so detailed and so technical. It's a tough read, but it's fascinating because it's all about how the federal government uses data and all the CIA and the FBI, how they all do it differently and how they work together. And some of the challenges I think are similar to us as insights professionals, because EA's got over 10,000 employees. And one of my biggest challenges is always how to get the right person, the right data at the right time. And then he talked about that a lot too in the book. So
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay. So you sort of have hinted at this so far along the way, but I'm curious just to dive into it directly. Given the diverse methodologies that are available in market research, from in-home ethnography to focus groups and quant surveys, how do you see the balance among the various methodologies we have access to evolving in the gaming space where, I have to imagine the attitudes and behaviors and even those audiences are changing kind of rapidly?
yeah. My philosophy for technology, which includes the huge explosion of AI, is that technology needs to focus. I hope that we are able to allow technology to focus on what it's good at, which frees up the humans to do what they're good at. And typically what the AI is good at and what the human is good at is not the same thing. So that's why it makes a really great partnership. One of the easiest examples is unstructured data. So we let the AI take the unstructured data and create summaries and create, categories of themes and stuff like that. But it takes the human to go back in there and review all of it. The human obviously is super difficult and time consuming for the unstructured data, but it's easy for the AI. And then the human can come in and do what they're good at, which is looking at the data, do the critical thinking and the problem solving, and being able to come up with a final deliverable for that unstructured data.
Makes sense. And it's like contextualization a big part of what the human can do too, right? That's not something that AI is going to be able to easily do, especially the contextualization of like your company and your values and what, your goals are. Yeah, things like that.
Yeah. So, like a great example in gaming is we've got games where there are words that like the AI think is bad, like murder, death, kill, for example, right? And it's actually the good thing, not a bad thing. So, it's just a good example of why it's so important to still have the human involved in this process because the humans are complicated. Humans, are not easy to solve. And so it's still going to take that humans working with the AI to produce the best output and the best deliverables.
Makes a ton of sense.
So you've been instrumental in building market research functions from the ground up, notably at EA and uShip. What do you think are the core pillars of establishing a successful, scalable research function in a large, complex organization? And then how do you ensure that it adapts to those rapid technological advancements?
So I have learned, and in some cases the hard way, the key to building scalable research function is really has nothing to do with the research itself. And it's all everything to do about understanding the needs of the business and your stakeholders and how it operates. Do people want, for example, do people want their findings in just a report that you hand out? Do they want to have a presentation and have been presented to them? Or do they prefer to use vendors? Do they want to do it everything in-house? So all of these questions are really how you build an effective and scalable research function. The research itself doesn't really change, but it's how that function interacts with the business, I think, is the important piece. And especially in large organizations like EA, flexibility and adaptability and trust is key. So I think the adaptability and the flexibility part is pretty self-explanatory. So I'll elaborate a little bit on what I mean by the trust piece, which is also essential. But put simply, it doesn't matter how brilliant or amazing the research that you do is if the business doesn't trust you. What you deliver will have no impact because they'll read it, they'll look at it and go, yeah, okay, whatever, and they put it down. So that's why I think that building the trust and the relationship with the businesses and your stakeholders is a key piece of doing that. And I think that also leads into, you asked about like keeping up with the technology. It is not easy. Everything is exploding so fast these days. And it felt overwhelming to me really at first. And so what I try to do to try to make myself feel like at least that I'm keeping up with the technology is that I try one new thing. My goal is to try one new thing every quarter. So whether that's a new vendor, whether that's new technology, whether that's like reaching out to somebody else, even within the company who's trying a new thing, but I try to investigate one new thing every quarter. And because I have a pretty solid understanding of the needs of the business and the challenges that I face, and where technology might be able to help or alleviate some of these challenges, it's relatively easy to do a quick evaluation and decide whether or not it's something to move forward with. So it's not necessarily huge like time sink. It's just like making sure, because sometimes it'll fall on the to-do list. Like it's like, oh, I'll just do that later. Oh, I'll just do that later. But
Yeah, I love that you schedule that and you just say, I'm going to do this, and you create that routine. Helps you stay curious, which I know you mentioned at the end of your YouTube series videos, and curiosity is a big value for us here at AYTM. So I love that.
yeah, stay curious. And it's actually, I mean, it's to the point where I put it on one of my, of course, we have, goals. And so it's one of my personal, a little bit of work, but also, a little bit of personal goal is making sure that exploring options. There's just so much out there and changing every day.
For sure. Yeah. I would, if you don't mind, can we go back to the trust issue again? Because I loved the way you talked about that. And I was curious, where do you think and maybe just in your experience, I don't want to force you to talk about insights across every, organization in the world, but where does the lack of trust come from? Is it typically like, if that's the starting point, is it a cultural thing that just has to be overcome within a company? Is it like, what is the root of that, do you think, between an insights function and like decision makers or stakeholders?
I think the root of it is fear. honestly, because as a stakeholder, if you're my stakeholder and I give you data, and if you take that data and you have a choice, you take my data and my recommendations and you trust me to, and you're like, all right, she said this, I trust her, I'm going to go do it. But if you do that and I'm wrong, then it's kind of on your head because you've made the decisions, you've actioned on X, Y, and Z. And so I think it's a fear of making a wrong choice. It comes from a fear of making the wrong choice. And some of it is cultural, I think for sure. Some of it, but typically I think what happens is somebody's been burned at some point, whether or not, the data didn't, get in there accurately, whether or not the recommendations were not accurate, like all of that can be whatever, but they're usually been burned at some point. And so if they have, whether it's by you or even if it was somebody else, getting over that hump and building that trust is going to be even more critical because they're not going to listen because they're afraid.
Right. It really sort of calls to mind and brings to the forefront just the importance of being really good stewards of insights.
Absolutely. And helping, if there is a lack of trust, having the patience and the empathy to work through that can be really, really frustrating and hard, but it's absolutely worth the effort to bring stakeholders along for the ride.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is a specific project, which is rare. I don't get to do this very often, but at EA, you led a global research project with 10,000 responses across 7 countries. And of course, let me know if I got any of that wrong. But my real question is, what were some of the challenges that you faced managing such a large scale, multi phase kind of project? And then to follow that, how did you balance the need for a core set of actionable insights with the cultural nuance that surely must have arisen across such a large number of markets?
Yeah, that project was a beast for sure. It was about 5 years ago. And so we didn't have, like, I wish we had what we have. Even 5 years ago, I wish we had then what we have today because it would have made it so much easier. But I think the key to this project was really leaning on my partners, both internal and external, for advice and feedback, because this certainly wasn't anything that I was going to be able to, sit in a room and do in a silo. There was just so many teams that I had to work with and ask for feedback and really try to, it was not going to be perfect. Like we knew that going into it, that perfection was never going to happen. We had to do our best to culturalize each one, but still maintain the same thread through everything. So then when we got to the reporting, it wasn't like, well, this is true for this country, but this is true for this country because we couldn't, measure them together. So it was a huge challenge, but the partners, that both internal, external, were critical to that process. And then as far as the actionability and the cultural relevance, I did the same thing when it came to the analysis and the reporting, and was leaning on my partners again, both internal and external. And one thing that I did that I don't normally do when it comes to like the readouts and the presentation was that I actually customized the reports to the major teams like around the business. And so when I did the presentation, I knew what that team specifically, what mattered to them, what was important to them. And so I could have those insights already customized to them. Now, obviously, that was really time consuming, and it is not something I would recommend or even do myself for every single project. But because this was so huge and so important and so critical to almost the entire business, it made sense, at least at a high level, to have some level of customization for the different teams. So the output or the deliverables in the presentation, everybody really appreciated, and it was much more impactful because I was able to say things that mattered specifically to them. So I certainly wouldn't do this for every project, but in this case, what do they say? Though the juice was worth the squeeze this time around.
Yeah, it sounds pretty critical to that project's success. That's, yeah, makes a lot of sense.
So, kind of talking more generally now, but I think that that project might be a good example of this. Market research is often seen as a function that informs business decisions, but how do you see the role of insights evolving to become more proactive, like maybe tailoring those reports to make sure people are getting those answers to what matters to them, to be more proactive rather than reactive to market shifts?
Yeah. So insights professionals, I know we don't like to guess. We want data to prove or disprove any hypothesis that we have. And one of the challenges I know I face is that historically, research moves too slow. The business is asking questions that require almost immediate answers, not, okay, I'm going to go execute a research project. I'll get back to you in 4 months with the answer. Like, that's never going to work. And that was actually a big problem that we had with the project, the 10,000 that we just talked about, was it was so big and so long that in some cases, they were like, well, it's too late now. Like, we've moved on with our lives. And so that's another reason why kind of the customization was necessary. I had to kind of go back and figure out what the new objectives were, what the current challenges were, and kind of adjust to that a little bit. But as far as how it's changing, in many cases, I think we're moving so fast that it's no longer about what do customers want today, but what do customers want tomorrow, because that's just how quickly things are moving. So we're going to have to start figuring out ways, I guess, to be more predictive and proactive rather than just reactive. So until somebody invents a crystal ball, an accurate crystal ball, because my magic 8 ball certainly isn't very accurate at this point, I think as insights professionals, we're going to be critical to helping the businesses make these more proactive, not just reactive decisions. And to play a more reactive role, we have to be strategic partners with the business. And so I know I'm always pushing my stakeholders to treat us as the consumer insights team as partners in the process and not just somebody that kind of hops in and out of the process as they need it. And we really need a seat at that proverbial table to really guide the company and to make more proactive decisions and create that proactive capacity. And I think trust plays a big role, and this comes back into play too.
Yeah. Now in my mind, I'm just thinking about the magic 8 ball. I just need more experience. I just need to level up, and then it will turn into that beautiful crystal ball that was going to give me all the magical answers.
That's right. Yeah, I'm still working on that until technology makes the magic 8 ball accurate. We're going to have to use data and insights.
We're going to get there. I can feel it. Something you said reminded me of, we had a guest on recently. I don't think that podcast episode has been released, but I asked a question about, like, here's how this applies to insights, something he just said. And I was like, how do you think this applies to foresight research? And he was like, insights is foresights. And it's like it's something that you just said. You were like, it's not about today. It's about the future. That's where we are now, right? Like, it's just a reality.
Yeah, it is a reality. It's all about tomorrow because today is too late.
It's too late. Yep.
All right. So, one of your many accomplishments includes optimizing survey systems to improve both the data collection and then the reporting processes. So, in your experience, what is something that survey systems typically get wrong or miss?
As far as system, I think we tend to want, especially the stakeholders, they want to put everything but the kitchen sink in a survey. And so I'm sure my stakeholders are sick of me saying it because I'm always telling them you can't boil the ocean with a single survey. And that's their knee-jerk reaction. And so one of the biggest challenges with what I did at EA with that process was one of the hardest things was getting people to land on, what are you trying to accomplish with this? What is going to bring you actionable data? What questions do we, if we had a player sitting in front of you, what would you ask them to make a decision about whatever decision is that you're trying to make? And so, but getting them to be razor sharp with those objectives and what they really needed to know was incredibly hard. And so I think a lot of times misses happen because they're not putting the time and effort, and it is a lot of effort in that upfront question and definitions in deciding what the objectives are and what the definitions of the metrics that you need to make decisions. So I think that is typically the biggest gap. And also, if you don't know what your objectives are and what you're trying to solve for, then you can't action on it. So that's why that first bit is I think is the biggest gap and the biggest challenge.
It becomes your map across the entire project, right? And if you don't have that anchor, yeah, it's
Because a lot of times they'll say, well, I just want to know. Well, that's good. I mean, I understand that you want to understand more, but do we need to take up the player's time, which time is money, by asking them things that you need to know versus giving you a data point with which you can action and make a decision? So it's hard. It sounds easy, but it's hard. It's important to put that effort into that upfront work.
for sure. And I think like Brianna and I, we can probably speak to that challenge playing out with our client base because I think that sometimes our insights friends are not successful at getting that distilled with their stakeholders because a lot of times we're having that conversation at the supplier level once we get the brief, right? Like, what are we trying to do here? Like at the core, at the end of the day, what are 3 things that you would be able to action on coming out of this, and trying to continue that conversation in the same way.
And maintaining that throughout the project too. I think that another stage where we tend to run into maybe a little bit of a conversation that needs to be had is, okay, we've lined on what are the core objectives in the brief. We'll work on that survey design, review it. Okay, well now they want to send it to their stakeholders. And each stakeholder's like, can I put in this question? I have 2 more questions, right? And it's like, no, we need to get back. What's the core? What's our North Star here? Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, that North Star. But honestly, I think that's why we have jobs because they're not research. They're not, this is hard. It is hard work. And it is our job. I think it is my job. It is my job to help them through that process and get to a point that you can come up with effective, actionable objectives because it is hard. So
Yeah. And we feel the same way. It's good for everybody to have that understanding and to be on the same page, right? Otherwise, you're just not going to have a successful project. So,
right. Exactly.
well, Leena, the conversation has been absolutely illuminating and what a fun and cool industry you're working in. And it sounds like you're doing so many cool things. There is a question that we really do like to ask virtually everyone who comes on the podcast. What is a piece of advice that you would offer to somebody who's just starting out in the world of insights?
My recommendation for anybody is listen and learn from anybody and everybody you can, but don't be afraid to try something new. Experiment, test and learn. I'll share one of my favorite quotes that was from the Puzzles and Mysteries talk that I did. And it was from Doug Altman, who is a statistician. And he said, everyone is so busy doing research that they don't have time. So they don't have time to stop and think about the way they're doing it. So my advice is don't be everyone. Be somebody who does think about the research, does think about, is there a better and different way to do it?
I love that. Yeah, highly applicable. Great advice for anybody starting out. So, Leena, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure for both of us, I'm sure. So, yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, it was really great to talk to you today, Leena.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time and I appreciate you having me on.
The Curiosity Current is brought to you by AYTM. To find out how AYTM helps brands connect with consumers and bring insights to life, visit AYTM.com. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the Curiosity Current on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.